Winston Churchill passed away at his London residence shortly after 8 o'clock this morning. The announcement of his death was released half an hour later in a statement signed by Lord Moran, his personal physician. According to the statement, Sir Winston died peacefully and without suffering. He was 90 years old. At his side were Lady Churchill, his 3 surviving children, and other close family members. It is a poignant coincidence that his father, Lord Randolph Churchill, died exactly 70 years ago today, and that only 2 days earlier Sir Winston's great-grandson had been born at Westminster Hospital. Lord Moran attended him at 7 this morning and departed from Hyde Park Gate at 9. The Queen was notified immediately and sent a message of condolence to Lady Churchill. In her telegram, she expressed her profound grief and that of her husband, offering their deepest sympathy to the family. She wrote that the loss of Sir Winston's many-sided genius had impoverished the whole world, while his leadership, vision, and indomitable courage, through which Britain and the Commonwealth survived their gravest peril, would stand forever as his memorial. Sir Winston Churchill was born in 1874 at Lenham Palace, a home built by his distinguished ancestor, the 1st Duke of Marlborough. He served as a Member of Parliament for 64 years and was Prime Minister for a total of 8.5 years, including the 5 defining years of his wartime leadership. His final appearance in Parliament came in July of last year, when members of all parties united in tribute. His life story mirrors the most critical moments of this century's history. As a child, Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill was a solitary, red-haired boy who delighted in playing with toy soldiers. Of his American-born mother, he later wrote that he loved her deeply, though from afar. He progressed from preparatory school to Harrow, where he stood out less for academic distinction than for his fighting spirit and his growing command of the English language. After 3 attempts, he gained entry to Sandhurst. His early career took him into active service in India and the Sudan, where he rode with the 21st Lancers at the charge of armed Dean. Even then, he was writing for newspapers, and in 1899 he joined the correspondence covering the South African War. Although that assignment lasted only 2 weeks, a month later he made a daring escape from captivity and resumed sending reports to the Morning Post. In 1900, at the age of 26, he entered politics. In his personal life, the most significant event came in 1908 with his marriage, which he later described as his greatest achievement. His bride was Miss Clementine Hosier. By 1911 he was once again at the center of events, personally directing the siege of Sydney Street as Home Secretary. With fresh ideas beneath a new hat, he later became First Lord of the Admiralty, modernizing the Navy in preparation for a war that loomed only a year or 2 ahead. At 40, as war broke out, he appeared destined for the highest offices. However, the failure of his ambitious plan for a seaborne assault on the Turks at Gallipoli brought political disaster. He resigned and served instead as an infantry officer in the trenches. Earlier, he had championed the development of the tank, a weapon that ultimately helped secure Allied victory and ushered in the era of mechanized warfare. He was recalled from the front to serve as Minister of Munitions, but after the war he suffered defeat at the ballot box. Not until 1924 did he return to Parliament, when he was appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer. During the general strike of 1926, Churchill edited the only newspaper published in Britain. Yet his fiercely independent spirit resisted strict party discipline, and in 1931 he broke with Baldwin. From his home at Chartwell, he launched a lonely campaign to warn the nation of the growing threat of Nazism. When war finally came, he returned to office at the Admiralty, and the message spread throughout the fleet: Winston was back. Within a year he became Prime Minister, assuming leadership in Britain's darkest hour. As France fell and Britain stood alone, his voice rang out in defiance, forging phrases that would echo through history, words by which men would later say this was their finest hour. In his moment of true greatness, he first inspired his own people and then rallied the Allies. The final advance followed, with Allied forces crossing the Rhine, crushing the Nazis, and conquering Germany. Victory brought celebration, and an overwhelming wave of affection swept the nation toward its leader. Yet only 2 months later, he was voted out of office. Though he could easily have retired amid universal honor, he believed he still had a duty beyond painting and writing his memoirs. At a ceremony in Fulton, Missouri, he delivered a stark warning about the Iron Curtain descending across Europe. In 1951, at the age of 77, he once again led the Conservatives to victory and became Prime Minister for a second time. In office, he continued his lifelong pursuit of unity among English-speaking peoples, mindful that his ancestors had fought on both sides of the American War of Independence. Alongside this, he advanced the idea of a united Europe standing firm against communism, with Germany and France bound together. In 1954, he received the honor of being installed as a Knight of the Garter, becoming Sir Winston under a young queen whose reign symbolized the transformation from empire to commonwealth that his life had spanned. The following year, after a farewell dinner with the Queen at No. 10, he retired from office. His later years remain vivid in public memory, a venerable yet spirited figure, secure in his place in history and even more so in the affection of his people. He formally retired from Parliament shortly before his 90th birthday on November 30th. Even after leaving the premiership, he remained active and, throughout his later years, a familiar and much-loved traveler. In 1959, at the age of 85, Sir Winston Churchill fought his final election. Though he had stepped down as Prime Minister 4 years earlier, he once again asked the voters of Woodford to return him to the parliamentary life he cherished. Sir Winston devoted 64 years of his life to active political service. He concluded his parliamentary career as the father of the House of Commons and stood as the most respected elder statesman of his era. International recognition followed him even into former enemy territory. In Germany, the country he had helped to defeat, he was honored with the Charlemagne Prize for his contribution to European unity. His former school, Harrow, also paid tribute to him during his regular visits. After stepping down as Prime Minister, his major public speeches became increasingly infrequent. One notable exception occurred in 1957 at a rally of the Primrose League, where he reflected on a rapidly changing world. He warned that humanity was gaining access to powerful and unsettling forces that could either bring extraordinary benefits or lead to senseless destruction. He expressed hope that human wisdom would keep pace with expanding knowledge and affirmed that his party, rooted in a proud past, still had an important role to play. Despite advancing age, Sir Winston remained restless. He frequently traveled to the Mediterranean in search of sunshine and relaxation and was often a guest aboard the yacht of Aristotle Onassis. One such voyage carried them to the Canary Islands. At other times, he preferred holidays in the south of France, especially in Nice, a city he loved dearly. It was there in 1958 that he and Lady Churchill celebrated their golden wedding anniversary. In 1962, while staying in Nice, he suffered a fall that resulted in a broken bone and required his return to London by air. At 87 years old, he spent 2 months in hospital. Yet when he was finally discharged, his familiar vitality and spirit remained unmistakable. As the final years of his life approached, his public appearances grew fewer and his journey shorter. Gradually and reluctantly, he accepted that complete retirement from public life was inevitable. In 1963, he informed his Woodford constituents that he would not seek re-election to Parliament. Even so, until Parliament was dissolved in 1964, he continued to attend the House of Commons regularly. He later remarked that although he could easily have retired after the war to write and paint, he remained in public life because, as he put it, he was a child of the House of Commons. The last public sight of Sir Winston came in November when he marked his 90th birthday. Standing at the window of his London home, he waved to the crowd gathered below. 6 weeks later, in the same street and outside the same house, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. His doctor, Lord Moran, arrived to find anxious onlookers assembling in the rain at Hyde Park Gate. After nearly an hour inside, Lord Moran emerged to deliver the first of many medical bulletins, announcing that following a cold, Sir Winston had developed severe weakness and had suffered a cerebral thrombosis. Visitors soon began arriving, among them Prime Minister Harold Wilson, who left visibly shaken and declined to comment. During the long vigil, Detective Sergeant Edmund Murray maintained his post outside number 28. Sir Winston's close companion and special branch bodyguard for 15 years, Murray worked 18 hours a day, calmly receiving visitors and maintaining order. A simple nod from him was enough to remind all present that his authority was absolute. Messages of sympathy poured in from across the world. Prime Minister Harold Wilson spoke of a man mourned globally by all who owed him so much, noting that Sir Winston now rested after a life that shaped history itself. Opposition leader Sir Alec Douglas Home expressed both deep sorrow and profound gratitude, saying that every citizen owed their freedom to him. Former Prime Minister Sir Anthony Eden described him as a loyal friend whose greatness was too vast to measure in that moment. Clement Attlee, his wartime deputy, emphasized his unmatched statesmanship and remarkable resilience, noting how he repeatedly returned from apparent failure to serve at moments perfectly suited to his abilities. Military leaders and religious figures echoed these sentiments. Field Marshal Alexander of Tunis called him the greatest Englishman of the age, finally at rest. The Archbishop of Canterbury spoke of gratitude to God for giving the world such a man, while the Archbishop of Westminster emphasized that religious freedom in Europe itself owed much to Churchill's leadership. Sir Winston once described the Battle of Britain as the nation's finest hour, and in many respects it was also his own. For many, the strongest memories of him are inseparable from that time. Members of the wartime generation found it almost impossible to accept his passing, having believed him indestructible. In June 1940, as Nazi forces overran Europe and stood just 21 miles away across the Channel, Britain stood alone. It was then that Winston Churchill assumed command of the nation's fate. In his first address, he famously declared that he had nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. Later, even as foreign ambassadors abandoned London and declared Britain finished, Churchill continued to speak and act with unyielding defiance. He delivered that unforgettable speech in which he declared, "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight in the hills. We shall fight in the towns. We shall never surrender." Winston Churchill was a master of the English language. He spoke it in a way no one else ever had. Through his words, he awakened the hidden strength of the British people, the bulldog spirit within them. He urged us to do what we already longed to do and believed we were capable of doing. Above all, we wanted someone like him to lead us. Churchill himself resembled the bulldog he symbolized. He embodied English courage, kindness, and relentless determination. His great head and massive jaw were unforgettable, and when he finished speaking, he would sometimes pause, his face relaxing briefly into calm. With just a few words, that expression would change again, and there before us stood the English bulldog once more. To my generation, there was no one else like him. No one greater had ever existed, and no one ever will. As long as the English language is spoken, fathers will tell their sons stories of Winston Churchill, in public houses, hamlets, and villages across the land. Those stories will always be told with affection, because he was loved by everyone. It is hard to think of any man in British history who was so universally admired. His own people loved him deeply, and he never failed them. I speak now as an ordinary person, one of the many who lived through and fought during the war years of 1940 to 1945. I remember clearly the dark days of 1940, when we were at our lowest point, until Churchill lifted us with his astonishing and powerful oratory. What made him truly great was his honesty. He never lied to us. He always told us the truth. If I were asked to write his epitaph, the epitaph of this great Englishman, I would write just one sentence: he was one of us. Tributes began arriving from all over the world. One came from the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Mr. Keith Holyoake, who said this was a moment of sadness, but also of immense pride, as people paused to honor a remarkable man. He described Sir Winston Churchill as a distinguished and beloved Englishman, one of the great figures of world history, whose words and deeds would never fade. New Zealand, he said, joined Britain, the Commonwealth, and the wider world in paying tribute to Churchill's memory. This was not merely a time for mourning, but a time for gratitude, that such a leader had risen in an hour of greatest danger. Churchill was a man who shaped destiny, indomitable, unconquerable, and a warrior in spirit. He became the embodiment of a nation and a symbol of freedom and hope for millions living under oppression during the darkest years of war. History would remember him at his finest, as Britain's defiant, resolute, and inspiring leader. General de Gaulle, in a message of condolence, said that France deeply felt England's loss. He declared that Churchill would always be remembered as the man whose leadership helped save France and protect the freedom of the world. The West German Chancellor, Dr. Hart, wrote to Lady Churchill expressing profound sorrow and sharing in her grief at the loss of a great statesman. President Tito also sent a message, expressing his belief that the nations of the anti-fascist coalition would forever remember Churchill's fighting spirit, tireless work, and vital contribution to Allied victory in the Second World War. News of his death interrupted American television and radio broadcasts. Reporting from New York, Sandy Gall described how Americans reacted with a deep sense of personal loss. Churchill was perhaps the only non-American who made them feel he was one of their own. In New York, merely speaking with an English accent was enough to prompt strangers to discuss his condition. His final struggle against death renewed American admiration for his courage and recalled his greatest wartime moments. To Americans, Churchill was simply the greatest man of the century. They remembered proudly that he was half American by birth and had been made an honorary American citizen by universal acclaim. It had been expected that President Johnson would attend the funeral in London, but his illness made that unlikely. Canada's Prime Minister, Mr. Celeste Pearson, said the entire nation was grief-stricken, noting that Churchill's courage, powerful words, leadership, and life would endure forever. India's Prime Minister, Mr. Shastri, said the truest tribute would be to continue working for peace and democracy, the principles Churchill had defended throughout his life. Finally, one of the few surviving soldiers who had fought alongside the young Winston at the Battle of Omnium in 1898, Chief Solomon Akant of Tanzania, said upon hearing of his death that Churchill had been a brave warrior, and that he was proud to have fought beside him.